Okay, another area that we're going to look at very briefly, because you'll probably be familiar with this kind of system from pretty much all Windows applications, so it's not something that we really have to dwell upon here, is the menu system. In the menu system, for instance, we have the File menu, where you can create a new scene, reset your scene as you go back to a basic empty scene, open a file, open a recent file, save a file out, save a file out as something, with a different name, save a copy of the file, xref objects, merge objects, blah 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 blah. There's lots of different options there, that are all related to files. In edit, we have undo, selection, as I said, which is basically the equivalent of pressing this button here. Redo, hold, fetch. Hold and fetch basically do a very quick save of your scene to a standardized file with a standardized name, and it's a very quick way of doing a sort of permanent undo, I suppose. If you reach a point, you're working on a file and you're happy with the way it's going, and you're worried that at some point, Max may crash or something may happen, accidents do happen, then you can use the hold function, and it'll quickly save out the file, and then later, if you want to go back to that state, you can click on fetch and it'll load up the file and you can carry on working from that save state. So quite a useful tool there. Delete, not very useful because you can just use the delete key, and that's probably much more intuitive. Clone, you can use Control V to clone objects, or you can use other interface methods for that. Select all, select none, select invert, select by the color of an object, the name of an object, rectangular region. You got the different region options here from the marquee menu that I showed you earlier. Those options. Then you have tools. There are various tools. You've got mirror, array. Again, these tools are shown up here. They're mirrored, if you excuse the replication of the term, in other parts of the user interface. Snapshot, spacing tool, normal align, align to camera, align to view. Again, these are all replicated over here, as I've just said. Rename objects, assign vertex colors, color clipboard, which was a utility that I showed you earlier. Grab a viewport, measure distance, channel info, various tools there from other parts of the user interface. Then you have groups, which is something which aren't really that used that much these days. They're similar. They're kind of hierarchy. Basically, they allow you to take, say, 4 teapots. You create a group. There we are. We'll call it group 1, and now the teapots are treated as one object. The problem with the groups is that they can lead to various problems with transforms, and in general it's probably not a good idea to actually create groups. It's actually a much better idea to create a helper and then link the 4 teapots to the helper, and then if you want to rotate all the teapots at the same time, you actually rotate the helper rather than using groups. So we'll go here and we'll ungroup those teapots, and they're not a group anymore. You've got views, various tools for changing your views. You can change your viewport background, show ghosting, show key times, shade selected objects. So as I said, various tools there for modifying the way the viewports work. Then you've got a creation menu, and this pretty much mirrors the creation panel, which we went through earlier. So you've got creation options for standard primitives, extended primitives, AC objects, compound particles, patch grids, and so forth. You've got all the creation options there. So if you can't find something in the command panel, then you can always go to the create menu and find it here instead. We have a similar menu for modifiers, so you've got all the modifiers separated out into different sections based on the type of modifier, and as you can see, they're ghosted out if they're not actually applicable. And as we have nothing selected at the moment, nothing's applicable. So let's select a teapot, and some of these will become, there we are, they're now applicable. Character. This allows you to create a character set, which is something that we probably go into on another DVD. Insert a character from another file. bone tools, which allow you to modify bones after you've created them. Set skin pose, assume skin pose. These are used by the character rig. Then we have reactor. This basically allows you to set up objects for dynamic simulation using the Max reactor system. Animation, which is quite an important menu in some ways. There are options which aren't really available elsewhere in Max. Here you can set up an IK solver solution for a bone chain, which is something which we'd go into on a different DVD on animation, say. You have constraints, so you can constrain an object to another object. For instance, you can make one object look at another object. I'll quickly show you how that works. There are different types of constraints, but in this case we'll go to animation constraints, look at constraint, and we'll make this teapot look at this teapot here. There we go. The pivot has been offset, so it's a little bit wonky, but if I move this teapot around, you can see that the teapot has been constrained to look at it, so it always looks at the other teapot. As you can imagine, the look at constraint is very useful for doing characters' eyes. You can constrain them, constrain them to two helpers in front of the eyes, and then each eye will look at each helper. You can constrain those two helpers to a third helper, and then you can move those around, and that will stop the character, for instance, going cockeyed. If you had a look at constraint on both eyeballs and they looked at one helper, if you put the helper too close to the eyeballs, the character will actually go cockeyed, as I just said. So it's usually a good idea to constrain the eyes to two helpers and do it using that method. You've got options here to change the controllers. You can choose different types of controllers. Add custom attributes, which are very useful for rigging characters. They're basically, as you can see, each one of these teapots has got attributes. For instance, they've got an angle or a direction. That's because each one of them has got a bend modifier on. And you can see angle and direction, they're both attributes, but let's say you needed a new attribute which you wanted to use to control a character's stride length or a character's color of its hair. Well, using custom attributes, which you can apply here, you can put that onto the object, and then you can use that to control other aspects of the character. Wire parameters, which will then allow you to wire, for instance, the angle parameter that I mentioned over here. You could wire that up to the custom parameter. So there you go, you could wire those together if you wanted those, and control the angle using the custom attribute instead of using the actual parameter here. You can make a preview of the animation that you've already produced, view the preview, or rename the preview. So, you know, some little tools there for working with animation. You've got graph editors here, where you can look at track view, which is for animating. Track view dope sheet, which is a different type of track view, where all the keys are shown as little discrete points, which is much more useful for when you're working with lots of animation keys. You can create a new track view, delete a track view, save a track view out for later use in the same file. You can create a new schematic view, delete the schematic view, or save a schematic view. And again, these two options are mirrored here on the main toolbar. To the right of graph editors, we have the rendering menu. The first item in the rendering menu is render. This brings up the render dialog, where you can set up various parameters for obviously rendering. In version 6 of Max, the render dialog was broken up into various tabs, so now you can address various elements of a renderer from these different tabs. When you assign a different renderer, different tabs will become available. So this dialog actually changes quite a lot if you're using Mental Ray or the standard scanline renderer, or for instance if you have V-Ray, Brazil, or Final Render installed. These different tabs will change to offer you the various elements of those renderers. Below render you have environment. This dialog is used to use an environment map, for instance, or to change the background color of a render. You can change the lighting tint of the entire scene, or the ambient color. Here you've got exposure control, so you can actually do a render and then control the intensity of the lighting in it using this dialog. And here you have the atmosphere dialog, and in here you can add volume lights. You can see volume light here, which will give you the effect of light shining through a fog, which is an atmospheric effect you see in quite a lot of CG. It's quite useful in certain circumstances. There's also standard fog, which is a depth queuing effect, which is also a standard CG effect. So there you are. There are the atmospherics and the other environmental elements. Then you have effects, and these are post-render effects generally. You can see here you've got things like lens effects, which will do lens flares, blurs, brightening and contrast changes, color balance, motion blur, and so forth. You have advanced lighting here, and for instance you have the light tracer. This is used when you're doing GI rendering, and you can see this has been this is actually part of the normal render dialog, so you can see it's one of the tabs of it. And in advanced lighting you can see you've got different advanced lighting techniques. This is the light tracer and is used by GI. It'll basically sample light bouncing around your scene, and it'll give you nicer lighting effects, greater fidelity to real world lighting. And we'll actually come across this in the tutorial, which we'll do in the second part of this DVD, so we'll leave that for now. Then we have render to texture, which is used by game artists predominantly. What this allows you to do is, for instance, light a scene using GI, and then you can actually do a render of that scene, and it will actually render out each object, and it'll actually bake the lighting into a texture, and that can be used in a game engine to give you very nice, very high quality lighting effects. Then you have the ray tracer settings. If you're using ray tracing in your scene here, you can address the ray tracer settings, and you can set up maximum depth of bounces of rays, and all the other elements which will optimize a ray tracing render. And again, you can see this is another tab in the render dialog. And you've got ray trace global exclude include, again, which is an optimization feature of ray tracing. Basically allows you to say, if you have an object in your scene which is incredibly dense polygon wise and doesn't really render in ray trace reflections, you can exclude that from the ray tracing, and that will actually speed up your ray trace rendering a lot. Below that you have the mental ray message window, which only really becomes relevant when you're using mental ray. When you do have mental ray as your active renderer and you're using it, any messages from mental ray will be posted into this window, and you can check out various diagnostic elements of your scene in here. You have the active shade floater. This is used with Active Shade, which is basically a real-time rendering system with 3D Studio Max. Real shade, active shade I should say, picks up any changes that you make to materials in your scene or lights, and then it will actually just render that element of the image. It can be used to tweak your textures and see how they react to lighting in a pretty much a real-time manner. So that's quite useful. So you've got Active Shade Floater here and the Active Shade Viewport. And the Material Editor, which can also be brought up by pressing this button here. Actually, for the rendering dialog, you can use this button here. So if I press this, there's a Material Editor, and this brings up the render dialog. So we'll go back to this menu and get it from here. Bring up the Material Editor. This is something that you'll use in quite a lot of scenes. Obviously, you're going to be making textures, and you'll use this render dialog. But I think we'll actually come across this in another part of this tutorial, so we'll deal with that with this dialog then. You have the Material Map Browser, and this allows you to look for materials in a material library. There's an example of material library. There you go. You can see all these various bitmap textures and pre-designed textures here. You can look for materials in the scene on the selected object, create a new material. And this dialog is actually usually brought up by the material editor. When you're in the material editor, you say, right then, let's make a new material, and you click on here, and this brings up the material map browser. So here we go. We can create a new material. Let's say we'll create a blend material. I know this is a blend material, and we can edit that. So This is basically a repository for all your basic shaders and bitmaps and so forth. Then we have Video Post, and this is a legacy system which was brought across from 3D Studio. It's basically a simple compositing system. You can render out one camera, render out another camera, and or you could, you can render out 10 cameras all in the same scene, and Video Post will take care of that for you. Or as an example, you can bring in some files and then you can composite them together using alpha channels and so forth. These days, though, it's been pretty much superseded by your dedicated compositing systems, for instance, Combustion or Shake. So not used that much these days, but still there for scenes when you actually need it. As I said, the multi-camera render feature of it is actually very good. It allows you to, if you have 28 cameras in one scene, to actually, while you're doing a simple render, you can actually skip between those cameras and just render those all out in one go, and set that up with a very simple script here. So it is actually quite useful for doing that still. Show last rendering. This is only active when you actually have a render. So if we do a render, there we go, we've done a render of a teapot. We close this window down. We can't see our render viewport anymore, so you can go here and you can say show last rendering, and it shows you last render. Below that we have 3 tools. We have the panorama exporter, which is used for producing panoramic views, for instance, for use in QuickTime. Below that you have the print size wizard. This is for setting up DPI settings for rendering out to print. So you can bring that up here, and you can actually work out various elements of what you're going to do with the print, what the DPI should be for a certain size of image, how big the image should be for a certain DPI, and so forth. So a quite useful little tool there. And below that we have the RAM player, which is something again we'll come to later in the tutorial scene. So we'll skip that for now. To the right of the rendering menu we have the customize menu, and here obviously you can set up lots of different options for working in 3D Studio Max. At the top of the customize menu we have the customize user interface. This is something which is worth going into quite quickly here. In Max you can customize the keyboard, you can customize the toolbars, you can customize the quad menus. This is a quad menu here. You can customize menus, and you can also customize the colors which are used in the user interface. So as an example, let's go to keyboard. I'm going to customize a keyboard element here, and I'm going to customize hide. So I'll click on here and I'll press H, and it takes us down to H. I'll scroll down until I can see the different hide options. And what I want to actually do is put a keyboard shortcut on hide selected object. So there it is, there's hide selection. I click in here, and I do, I'm going to use Control H. So there you go, you can see it's got Control H. It tells you what it's assigned to at the moment, which is place highlight. Hiding your selection is probably used a lot more than placing highlights. So in this case I don't mind losing that particular shortcut. I'll assign that, and you can see here it now says hide selection Control H, and you can then save that to one of your UI setups. So in this case we'll just save it to Max Start. Actually we'll save it to a new GUI setup, and we'll call this one Chris's. I'll call it Chris GUI. There we go, Chris GUI. Just save that. Let's create a toolbar. I'm going to create a toolbar called Chris Toolbar. So over here we'll go new toolbar. We'll call that Chris. Oops, Chris Toolbar. Okay, it's created the toolbar here, and I'm just going to move that over to the left hand side of the screen, and we'll just dock it there. There we go. You can see it's actually quite small at the moment, but basically we can drag commands onto that later, and I'll do that when I show you how the MaxScript editor works, so we can show how those two things link up. You can do the same thing for quads. I could create a new command here, get any of these commands and put it into a quad. You can modify any of the existing quads, so you have a lot of options there. Same thing for menus. You can modify the menus. Okay, so as you can see, there's lots of options for customizing Max, for changing keyboard shortcuts, changing the menus, changing the way the quads work, or adding commands to them, and the toolbars. So there's a lot of flexibility there. when you've created a custom UI scheme, you can load it, you can save it, which is something I just did from within inside the custom user interface dialog, or you can revert to a startup layout. This is the custom UI default switcher. Now, for instance, we may have created a new layout over here, and this allows us to change what the default one is and so forth. And you can see down here it explains a little bit about this dialog. So let's just close that down. You can show different elements of GUI from here, and you can see at the moment 3 of the 4 elements are shown. I'll just turn this on, and you can see that we actually have a number of toolbars which are currently hidden. And again, you can address these by going here, and you can also toggle them from here as well. So you can hide various elements. Now you can see I've got axis constraints showed, so we'll just untick that to hide that again. And you can see we've got layers and extras here, so we'll just do the same for layers and the same for extras. There we go. And we'll do the same for Crisp Toolbar. And now that's hidden Crisp Toolbar over here. If I right click on that and click on that again, you can see it's brought up Crisp Toolbar. So for now we'll just hide that again. Something that's quite easy to do is to accidentally move an element of your GUI. So if you're happy with your GUI and you're prone to moving bits around it, accidentally, you can lock GUI with this particular item here. So that's quite useful. Configure paths. This is quite a main configuration element of Max. Here you can set up the default paths that Max will use to find various elements. As an example, if you go to the material editor and go to load a bitmap image, Max will automatically look in this path here. Same thing if you created a preview of an animation, Max would by default save it out to this path here. So you can modify these paths and then customize Max so it saves and loads elements from different areas on your setup. This tab here allows you to set up which plugins are used, and Max will search into any directories that you have specified here and load up any bitmaps that you have specified. So you can see at the moment we're just using the default standard plugins and also the plugins from the plugin directory. These are both standard, so there's nothing special about this particular setup of Max. And here you can set up various other elements where it'll find external files and where it'll find xrefs. So again, these are search paths for external files and xref. So again, pretty useful stuff. Unit setup. This is something I really wouldn't change when you're working with Max. It's something of a mistake to actually change the units in some ways, I find. It's much better to actually think of the standard Max unit, which we'll see here. If we click on this teapot and go to modifiers, you can see that it has a radius of 34.687 units. Now the question is, what are those units? Are those millimeters or meters or kilometers? Well, the truth of the matter is they're whatever you want it to be. And generally it's a good idea never to change the units from here. You've got options of changing them to American or international. Just leave them as international and leave them as generic. Don't change them to metric or US standard or anything like that. Just leave them as the standard setting. What this allows you to do is that if you load the file into another copy of Max, if you've changed the generic units to anything else other than the generic setting, Max will then try to rescale those objects to be the correct scale for that scene. And the problem with that is that any rig that you may have set up that is scale dependent will generally be broken. So you're not really gaining anything by doing that. So it's generally something that's best avoided. As I said, just say to yourself, we're working on a project which is a model of, let's say, London. It's a very big model, so we need a very large basic unit to model London. Now, if it's going to model all of London, which is, say, some 35 miles across, you need a very big unit there. So you could say that one unit equals a kilometer, or if you wanted a little bit more detail, you could say one unit is 100 meters or maybe even meters. But once you start using meters on a model as big as a city, even that unit size is not really that good. So do some R&D, find out what scale works for you. It works at the opposite scale as well. If you're working on a very tiny little scene, little insects or even bacteria, again you have to really decide what your scale is. And also, you know, a lot of the times a definite scale isn't that important. If you're working with bacteria, unless you're working directly with scientists and they're sitting next to you, you know, telling you that particular bacteria is, you know, 100 microns across or wherever, it really doesn't matter that much as long as, you know, the relative scales of things are correct on screen. So, you know, there's a tip. In production, don't change the basic unit setup. Just leave it as is, and, you know, just work with the scale that you've decided to work with. Okay, below that we have grids and snaps. Here you can basically turn on the different grids and snap options. And you can also change the scale of angle snaps. So for instance, at the moment it's using the default 5 degrees, which I generally find is actually quite a good level. And you can just, you know, customize this to be whatever you want it to be. You can see at the moment you've got the home grid, which is here, set to have a grid spacing of 10. And you've got major grid lines every 10 units. So, you know, and, you know, you can also change the size of that grid. So there we go. We can make the grid different sizes. So let's just put that back to the default. Okay, cool. Next we have viewport configuration. We'll bring this up, and this is exactly the same dialog as the viewport configuration that you saw here. So it's just another way of getting to that particular dialog. Below that you have plugin manager, which was introduced I think in Max 4, and this allows you to set up whether plugins are loaded when Max is loaded or whether they're deferred. If they're deferred, basically that means that Max won't automatically load them when it loads. It'll wait until you actually specifically use that plugin, then it will actually load the plugin into memory. This is just a way of optimizing the way Max works, and it can save quite a lot of memory. You can see I've actually got the biped plugin here, and you can see it's actually using what appears to be, I think it's 10 megabytes of memory. So you can see, you know, if you have a lot of plugins, that can actually add up to quite a lot of memory usage for, you know, not much use really, because some of these plugins may never be used in a particular scene. So you can set up that there. And finally at the bottom we have preferences. This brings up quite a key dialog in Max. Here you've got various options for customizing pretty much anything in Max. This is not so much customization, you know, you can tell by the dialog. This is more about preferences, you know, how exactly do you want Max to work. So as an example, we've got levels of undo here. And as you saw earlier, undo is very useful. But as an example, let's say you were converting a mesh from one type to another, and every time you converted that mesh, it was using, say, 300 megabytes of memory to do that. You know, let's say you have a model of a city and it's 3 million polygons, 4 million polygons. Every time you modify one part of that city, it may use up, like I said, 300 megabytes. Well, if you've got 20 levels of undo and you're making 300 megabyte changes with every change that you make in Max, you're very quickly going to run out of memory. So you can actually go into here and put the undo levels down to 0, you know, if you're working on something very temporarily, and Max literally won't do a conversion because of the amount of memory that it's using. You can just knock it down there. You can see you have options for general options, files, viewports, gamma correction, you know, rendering, animation settings, preferences for mental ray, radiosity, max script, gizmos, and inverse kinematics. So as an example, you know, gizmos that we've been using, if I just close this for a second, you know, the gizmos that we've been seeing here, you can actually turn those off if you really don't like them, and you can just use keyboard shortcuts to achieve the same thing. And you can do that there in the gizmo tab, so you can see gizmos off, and you can change the size of the gizmos and whatever really, you know. So there's a lot of scope there for changing your preferences with Max. Right, to the right of the customize menu we have the Max script menu. This is something that we'll actually be dealing with in a specialist DVD in our series. So I won't go into that in a great deal of detail at the moment, but let's just give you a quick example of what you can do with it. I've turned on the macro recorder here. What that means is that when I open up the Max script listener, and if I change anything in the scene, it will actually be input here. You can see it's actually outputting here. So I click on the viewport, it's saying clear selection. Let me make this a little bit bigger. If I click on the teapot, you can see it's saying select teapot 2. Click on this teapot, select teapot 4. So you can see for every action that you do, pretty much every action in Max anyway, there is a Max script output. And you can use that output as the basis for a script. And you can also use that output as the basis for a macro button. So as an example, let's bring up Chris's toolbar again. There we go. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a very basic script that will quite simply change the segmentation of a teapot, and we'll change the radius to say 30, dead on 30. So that'll be quite an interesting little thing to see. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to get the command for changing the radius. So we'll just change that to 30 here, and you can see it's brought up the command here. You can also see that these are all instances, so as I'm doing this they're all changing. And then the segmentation, let's just change that to 4. There we go. So now we have the two commands that we need to do what we want with our custom script. We've got change the radius here, and we've got change segmentation here. So I'm just going to grab these two commands, and I'm going to right drag them onto my little toolbar here, and you can see that Max has brought up a little plus sign, which means it can create a button at that point. Drop that, and it's just used the default script button. And we'll just close this down now, and what I'm going to do is to show you the button actually in action. I'm going to put these back to a sort of the original setting. We'll do that, and we'll put that back up to 10. There we go. And I'm just going to select these all and make them unique. I'm going to do this by using this button here, which is make unique. There we go, make this one unique. So basically while I'm doing this, they're not actually instances anymore, they become unique. And let's just check that. Okay, they're all unique now, and they're all back to the original tessellation and radius settings. So now if I select a teapot, press this button, what you've actually seen there is that particular change was unique to that particular teapot. When I changed the settings on that teapot, it was explicitly using that teapot's name in the script commands. So what we need to do is just quickly go here, and I'm going to edit this macro script, and you can see it's saying here teapot 6 radius. Now that's really not what we want. So whenever you have any selection in Max, it uses a $ to indicate that it's a selection and an object. And you can see that in this case it's, you know, object teapot 6. Now if you change it to just $, that means whatever you've got selected. So if we just do this, there we go. We'll evaluate that script. That should be fine, and we'll just save that. And now that will work with whatever we have selected. So there we go. We can just select any teapot, and it'll just take our current selection and apply that script to it. So there we go. I'm going to edit this button's appearance. You can change it to any button image that you want to choose here. You've got a wide variety. You can also draw your own icons for buttons, so that's very useful. You know, this is used a lot in high-end production to customize the tool set of a studio. Or you can also change the button to having a text name. So we'll call this teapot 1. Okay, that. And there we go. You've actually got the button there. We'll just edit the appearance and put it back to an image again. We'll just use this. Just use this icon here. So there you go. You can see we've got a little button, and that does what it does. So yeah, very useful. You can see Max Script is very cool. So in the Max Script menu anyway, we have a new script, which will basically create a window where you can type a script in. You can open a script, which is, you know, obviously if you've got a script on disk, you can open that up there and start working with it. Run a script will run whatever script that you currently have in the script editor. Max Script Listener brings up the listener, which is something that we were just dealing with just now. You know, various options in there in the Max Script Listener, which is something we'll come to, as I said, in another DVD. Macro recorder, whether it's on or not. When it's on, don't forget everything that you do is outputting to the listener, and that can actually slow down Max quite a bit when you're doing a lot of very repetitive operations. So it's generally a good idea not to have the macro recorder on at all times, so we'll just turn that off there. And then at the bottom we have another dialog. Again, this is used with Max Script, and this basically is a script generator that will actually create floaters. So you can see any of these standard Windows GUI elements. You can actually just create these, drag these onto here, and then that will output a script which will create the same dialog in Max. And then you can edit that script and add in whatever functionality it is that you want to have that dialog do. So a very useful little tool there for setting up very basic GUIs with Max Script. The final menu is the help menu. As I said earlier, very good help in 3D Studio Max. So I'd well recommend going through whatever documentation comes with Max and going through the tutorials. Lots of very valuable information there, and you access all of that information from here. You can see you have the new features guide, which details all the new features in this current version of Max, whatever they may be. You have the main user reference, and as I said, that's for any basic workflow in Max. You know, what is a viewport, what is a teapot. Tells you about all the options for everything, NURBS, gizmos, whatever you're really interested in. There's lots of information in there. It's very well illustrated, very well written. The search function works very well. So if you're stuck with anything in Max, I really would recommend using the user reference. It is actually useful. You have the same thing for MaxScript. You know, what are the MaxScript commands for working with NURBS? What are the MaxScript commands for working with splines? You know, any of those things, just go to the MaxScript reference and you can pick up those commands from there. You have tutorials, which, as I said, you know, they're very good. It's well recommended, again, that you go through those to get yourself up to speed in Max. You have the hotkey map here, which is something that you see when you load Max as well. You know, it's pretty much the splash screen. And on here, this is an interactive thing. So as you move your mouse over it, it'll actually tell you the current keyboard shortcuts for 3D Studio. So that's actually quite useful. You know, have a quick look through that when you're getting used to Max, and you can see the different keyboard shortcuts that you can use there. Below that, you have additional help. You know, any third party or any additional help that you get with Max, you can see in here. So for instance, here's the Reactor manual for working with Reactor Dynamics, or the Mental Ray user manual, and so forth. So you know, if you bought Brazil, the Brazil help file may actually be listed in here, and you can go to here and get the additional help from there. 3D Studio Max on the web. If there's any sort of any support issues you may have, you can go to the online support site. You can get updates from here and so forth. Other different resources can be gained from here. So quite useful stuff there if you're connected to the internet directly. Then you have the authorized 3D Studio Max dialog, and below that you have the About 3D Studio Max. Okay, so there we go. Those are the 3D Studio Max menus.